Great. So welcome everybody. We are so excited to have Dumebi here today to talk about inclusive organization and how her own journey has been helping her and other women and men to see this from a different perspective. She will provide more details about herself and this beautiful journey. And again, welcome to everybody. This is a Connect, Communicate, and community process that we want to continue launching as a learning opportunity. And we're going to be having this conversation open to questions as well. So welcome, Dumebi.
Yeah, awesome. Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Dumebi Egbuna. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let me know if you can see it. Can you guys see this?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So again, I'm Dumebi Egbuna. I'm co-founder and CMO of Chezie. I'll get into a little bit more detail of what Chezie is, what we do, how it works, and then we'll talk about finding inclusive workplaces. So our mission is to create the most inclusive and equitable workplaces on earth. I founded this with my brother, Dumebi Egbuna. So we both have experience working at pretty big companies. I work at IBM and my brother works at Accenture. So the problem we wanted to solve, so as minorities in the corporate workspace, we're really used to being the only minorities in the room. I was really used to being the only Black woman in lots of meetings. I'd go to conferences and I'd be like one of 3 maybe Black women out of like 5,000 people there at a conference. So we started sharing these experiences, and he had similar ones, being a Black male at Accenture, another pretty white dominant company, and then field, of course, in consulting. So we kind of shared experiences, and we were like, there's really no place for minorities to find out about the minority experience at different companies. If you wanted to find out about the minority experience, you'd have to go on LinkedIn and maybe find minorities that work at a prospective company, or you'd have to, look within your network. But not everyone has that social capital. Not everyone, especially minorities, not everyone has people within their work or within their network that work at like corporate companies. So we wanted to create this platform where diverse job seekers can gauge a company's commitment to inclusion and learn more about the minority experience before they apply. And that is kind of our solution. So we like to kind of coin ourselves as a glass door for minorities. How it works is, a professional would go on our site, they'd fill out their portrait trait, which is their demographic information. So race, gender, sexual orientation, age, disability, and veteran status. And then they would fill out their story or their review of their company. And then a job seeker on the flip side can go on and filter the stories for people who identify similarly to them. So like as a Black woman, I would want to know more about the Black experience or the Black woman experience. And I can go on our site and kind of filter our stories by people who have similar identity traits. I'm going to stop here. Any questions about kind of who we are, what we do?
That's brilliant. Looks really cool.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think kind of what differentiates us is the fact that we aren't like a Glassdoor. Obviously, there are thousands and thousands of reviews for different companies, but you don't know who's submitting those reviews. And as a minority or as a woman or as I think your group is, how old is what is the demographic? Women.
45 plus.
45 plus.
Like, yes, it's a community of women 45 plus.
Yeah, so there's really, have no idea if those stories are coming from people who look like you or identify similarly to you. So like ours is really granular in that sense. And I think it's kind of, that's the value proposition in itself.
And maybe you're going to cover a little bit more about that. You just mentioned that it's anonymous. So that offer this kind of safe environment where people can bring their stories or personal perspectives on that. So if you cover that, go ahead. And if not, I think that's kind of interesting for continue building this community.
Yeah, that's a good point. So our stories are anonymous. Like I said, you fill out like your portrait traits, and you can kind of elect, or you can choose which portrait traits you want to fill out. So a lot of minorities, especially if they work at like a smaller company, they won't want to put out all of their portrait traits just because they're easily identifiable. So if I worked at, a smaller company, so I might only just put like female and like my age or like my sexual orientation, as opposed to putting Black female, just so I can keep that anonymity. But it's kind of up to you. You have to fill out one portrait trait, and we encourage people to fill out as many as they're comfortable with, just because that's more helpful to like the job seeker who's trying to read these reviews.
Thank you.
Is age one of your portrait traits?
It is, yeah. So like I said, it is gender, race, age, sexual orientation, disability, and veteran status. And I think that's also really important because when people think of minorities, they often just think of like gender or race. They don't really think of some of the other ones. They don't think of age, they don't think of disability. Veteran status is one that's often overlooked. So we try to be pretty comprehensive.
And when it comes to these stories, how are they built? Do you ask individuals to write them up? Do you help editorially?
Yeah, so we ask people to write them up. So like when you go fill out a story on our site, it'll kind of prompt you. I think there are 7 prompts, and they range from like diversity programs to promotions to the hiring process, relationships with management. So you click whichever or topics you want to write about, and then you just kind of write your story, talking about, you know, your personal experience with the different prompts, if it's good or bad, what could be improved, etc.
And are you funded by job postings, or where's the revenue come from?
Yeah, so on the employer side, so this is our job seeker offering, and then we have an employer offering where we are helping employers track and manage their employee resource groups. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with employee resource groups.
Oh yeah, very cool.
Yeah, especially like as women, I think a lot of the companies that we are probably looking at probably have like women business resource groups, or for me, I'm in a Black employee resource group at IBM. So these are kind of communities within your companies that bring together like identity folks and kind of build upon that sense of like inclusion and belonging. So we have an offering that kind of helps those ERGs and those groups, you know, post events, track participation, etc. Okay, cool. So this is kind of why we're here to talk about identifying inclusive workplaces. I think this is an important topic, especially as women, especially, you know, your demographic of 45 and older. As we look to return to work or maybe switch jobs, it's important to kind of keep an eye out on, you know, what an inclusive workplace looks like and how you can kind of determine if that workplace is inclusive. So first, let's just talk about like diversity versus inclusion. I think most of you have probably seen this quote of like diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance, which is a really like a simple quote, but I think it's a good way of like illustrating the difference between the two. And I think people often get them, diversity and inclusion, they often think that they're like synonyms, but the truth is they're not. Like diversity is really pretty visible. You can walk into a work environment and see like if the range of people in there is a diverse range of people, especially if we're looking at things like, you know, age, race, gender, those types of things. But inclusion is a lot more hard to, you know, measure. Inclusion can be measured by a sense of belonging, connection, and community at work. So you would only be able to measure it by asking people if they feel included or if they feel like they belong at a company, if they feel like they are connected to the people that they work with, or the vision or the mission of the company. Inclusion also has to do with feeling like you can bring your whole self to work. I know with a lot of minorities, we kind of feel like we have to leave part of ourselves at home when we come into the office and kind of show up as, you know, the most professional version of ourselves. But when we think of like professionalism, that also has like a, you know, a very white conservative kind of lens to the idea of professionalism. So being able to be in an environment where you feel like you can just show up as like, I'm a Black woman, I'm young, I'm, you know, vibrant, I have a vibrant personality, being able to like showcase that and not feel like I have to cover that is really a big part of, you know, inclusive workplaces. So like, what does inclusion look like? So when you go, you know, tour office spaces or you go into your interviews and you kind of get to walk around the office environment, what does that look like in practice? First would be access to resources. So giving employees, you know, the resources that are necessary to be inclusive. That means like access to employee resource groups, or maybe there are mentorship programs, or, you know, there are surveys where people can really express how they're feeling about inclusion or belonging in their workplace, giving them the necessary tools to voice their opinion, and be an inclusive employee. Next would be having a voice. Employees have a say in the decisions that impact their work. They also feel like their voice is being heard. So that means like employees are able to go to their manager and be like, this is my feedback on you or our work practices. As a woman, I feel like I would need XYZ in order to succeed, and that is taken into consideration. Next is being accepted for who you are. Again, this is kind of less visible. You have to, talk to different employees at the company, but individuals are connected to a common cause, and they're also recognized for their uniqueness. This goes back to feeling accepted, being able to being able to come to work as your full self. Next, learning and development. Employees have opportunities to develop in their careers. They're giving the resources and tools to not feel stunted. They feel like there is a path for their growth success at a particular company. We'll touch on this a little later, but it's really important that you go to you look at their diversity reports and see like what representation looks like in leadership, and like look at what diversity looks like at like a lower level, which is really where like the diversity recruiting, diversity pipeline really comes into play. Like they might have a lot of diversity within like the lower levels, but that usually stifles off as you get to senior management, and a lot of that has to do with the lack of learning and development being given or catered to minorities in the workplace. Next would be collaborative environments. Obviously not every job function has like a collaborative work environment, but look to see like what the teams look like. Is there a strong sense of connection between team members? Is there the ability for you to be able to share your ideas and like work with each other? And is that working with each other productive? Is your voice or your ideas being heard? And then lastly, there's an intentional commitment to inclusivity. I think especially within the last year, a lot of companies have been like, oh, like diversity and inclusion matters, and they've put out their statements and done, kind of the bare minimum at this point. But are they actually, putting that stuff into practice? Are they, bringing in outside resources or like outside DEI consultants to be like, hey, these are the best practices. Let's see how we can implement it. Are they talking to, their minority employees and seeing like what's missing and what could be improved from a DEI standpoint? So just making sure that they have a clear focus to inclusive practices and it's not all, BS. Any questions on this?
Yeah, I'm going to keep asking questions because I'm fascinated with this. I'm curious to whether you have a way of measuring this. Do you have an audit or an index where you can give a company a score so that they can get, kind of really know what to focus in on?
Yeah, so my brother and I have done a couple like consulting projects at this point, and we have like a survey that we put out, and it's all about inclusion and belonging, like by the different groups within a company. So that can be by the different minority traits, it can be by the different teams, so like product, marketing, whatever else team you have. It could be by like lower management or lower level versus like management level. So you really segment it on different factors and you see where the disconnect is. And that's how a lot of companies do it. They'll have different DEI surveys that they like to put out, every year or so that really gauge what their employees are thinking, if they feel like they belong. And belonging is a really big contributor to retention. So if they don't feel like they belong, they're going to, switch companies. So that's definitely been a focus from a DEI standpoint in the last couple of years. Yeah.
I have a question regarding what you're saying at the beginning of this slide, that it's basically the combination of being collaborative and also having a voice to provide this space. But not everybody has the same personality traits. So not everybody is able to speak up or just say what they're thinking. So what been your experience facilitating those insight for organization and even for people to get that journey? Sometimes you have people who will speak up and will be easily, but some other opportunities will be people that it's not the first step, the easy one.
Yeah. One of the recommendations that we often give out is to do like one-on-one manager to employee meetings, like maybe weekly or bi-weekly, where it's really all about, talking to your subordinate or your employee about like, what are your career goals or what feedback do you have for me as your manager? Like just having that open kind of communication. And then in a one-on-one setting, people are more likely to, voice their opinion. Maybe they don't want to do it in front of like a full group. But if it's on a one-on-one setting where you know your managers really has your best interest in mind, like DEI is top of mind, they want to pursue that and make it as much of an inclusive environment as they can for you, you're more likely to, voice that opinion. And then also in these surveys, most of them, they should be at least anonymous. So that's also a good format for you to voice your opinion if you have, feedback for your company from a belonging or an inclusivity standpoint.
Great point.
Yeah.
I'm
Any other
curious-
questions?
Yeah, I'm curious, like when you're interviewing for a job, presumably the company you're interviewing with is putting on their best face.
Yeah.
Are there any like red flags that you tell people to look out for? Any specific questions where they can sort of try to figure out without saying, what's your culture, or
Right.
Are there any things that you advise people to look out for?
Yeah, we'll actually talk about that on the next slide, but using platforms like ours, like not to be a like a plug for us in any way, but like using platforms like us or even Glassdoor and just gauging like what a mass employee population has to say, because you can't, companies can't filter that. And then also, again, looking at their diversity reports, looking what like the retention looks like for minorities up the ladder, asking some questions specific to the things that pertain to you. So if it's, what is your maternal leave policy? Or I would also ask, like, personally, I would ask, like, do you offer like mental health resources, or some of those more granular questions that they aren't likely to touch on in an interview or put on, or like just say to you. Like I would ask some of the more niche
Specific
questions that like specific questions that pertain to like your identity traits.
Yep, that makes sense.
And I can send out we have like a PDF that we built up of like questions to ask during an interview. So I can send that out afterwards.
That would be great. That would be fantastic. I'd love to share that with our community.
Yeah, for sure. Any other questions on this slide? Okay. So how do you find it? We just touched on this, but first is looking at their diversity reports. Again, representation is oftentimes dies out as you move up the ladder, unfortunately. A lot of companies are focused on DEI recruiting from like a lower level standpoint. And if those minorities don't have the resources, they don't feel included, they don't have the mentorship, they're not going to make it all the way through management positions. So I would first, before I even apply to a company, honestly, I would look at their diversity reports. A lot of companies are now starting to put that out as like a public facing material. A lot of them have made commitments to increase their representation over the next 5-10 years. So I would just look at what they have going on and see, if that's something that you are interested in. Next, I would explore their careers and teams page. This is often where they tout, like if they have employee resource groups or different mentorship programs. They might also talk about the different benefits they offer. So if they do offer, mental health assistance or paid maternal paternal leave, a lot of times it'll be on their career pages. And then if it's not on their career pages, make sure to ask about that in the interview. Talk directly to diverse employees. If you have diverse employees in your network that work at a prospective company, have like a 15-minute informational interview with them. Typically having these like informal informational interviews, people are so likely to just be like, this is how I feel about the company, take it or leave it. They're not like paid ambassadors for the company, so they're more likely to, give their true opinion, good or bad. And if possible, have it with multiple diverse employees. Again, I realized as minorities, we don't necessarily have the social capital as some other people, but if you do have a great network, utilize it and have those conversations. Next, we just talked about this, asking about DEI during the interview. Typically when people go to interview, they ask like the basic questions, like what is the pay range? What is the type of work I'll be doing? Just asking more about like the job description. But now I think it's important, especially as diverse job seekers look to, as diverse job seekers really value DEI more and more. It's important to ask about this in the interview, just so they know, one, that you value it, like they want to know that will be an inclusive employee, but two, just to make sure that they offer the programs and things that pertain to you. So again, whether it's paid maternal paternal leave, mental health assistance, do they have mentorship programs, whatever it may be, it doesn't hurt to ask. And then again, I'll send out that PDF. And then lastly, use Chezie. We are, kind of a platform for you to gauge that minority experience before you go apply or before you have an interview. We have, I think, 1,500 stories on our website from, top companies in the US. So IBM, Accenture, Facebook, Twitter, within various industries. So utilize, our platform, encourage your friends to utilize our platform, submit stories. And yeah, we hope to be a great, resource to you in your job search or in your careers. Any questions?
Is there an easy way to access diversity reports, and have you got that on your Chezie website?
On our website, I think we do host like some diversity numbers. I don't know if we have links specifically to their diversity reports, but usually if you just Google like, Facebook diversity report, it'll be like the first one or two, links.
Got it. So you just have
to Google. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. If they put it out. Again, some companies don't put it out. It's not something that's mandatory, but especially within the last, I would say 1 to 2 years, that's something more companies have been doing.
Because the EEO1 data, companies seem to be, there's a big push for that. Yeah.
Right.
Thanks.
Yeah, Nancy is mentioning in the chat that it's hard to find a diversity number for smaller companies or private health, and I think that's part of the journey that you with your organization are going through. And do you have experience with other organizations in this similar journey or partnering with other ones that maybe is next steps in the future of your own path of the organization, also to make more that accessible or at least create awareness? Because sometimes the report itself is just the symptom, not necessarily the journey to get there.
Right. So that's kind of been some of the consulting projects that we've done. They've definitely been with the smaller companies, and we've encouraged them to put out more diversity and inclusion things publicly facing, just because, again, that's what people care about. That's what job seekers care about. That's what consumers care about. And the transparency also will like hold those companies accountable. If they're putting out that they plan on increasing their representation numbers to, X% by 2025, everyone can see it. It's publicly available. They kind of have to stick to their word on that. So that's something that I think, just like in the wave of DEI, I think we'll see that more and more. But for those smaller companies, I guess it is kind of hard to, put that out.
Yeah, I think that in my experience, it's also related with the number versus the intent and the focus.
Yeah.
Because sometimes just putting a number in the demographic doesn't impact the reality of the mindset of the inclusion in the organization.
Right.
And the big balance between both, because it's not that it's not relevant. I think that it's super relevant, but also the number itself doesn't translate necessarily in the inclusion piece.
Right.
And maybe you hear from those thousands of stories, things like that, where companies are super diverse in the demographic, but not necessarily super inclusive. So I don't know if you remember one in particular that come to your mind, that if you mind to share with us.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a specific company, but we've had so many companies come to us for like, we want to do diversity and inclusion recruiting. And that's a huge thing. Everyone wants to get their representation numbers up, and like, that's great. But like, even if you do hire these minorities, they're not necessarily going to stay with your company if you don't have the programs and initiatives in place to retain them. If you don't have the employee resource groups, if you don't have inclusive, workplaces, if it's a hostile environment, those minorities are going to leave. So your retention numbers are going to go down. Like your representation might go up for a little bit at like lower level, but like the retention is going to die off if those internal policies aren't in place. So that's a conversation that we've had with lots of companies, is that like, let's work on your internal programs, initiatives, policies first, and then we can revisit the recruiting aspect of things.
I have a question. Do you see an impact of the COVID, new ways of working triggered by COVID, and having a positive impact on inclusion of typically under tapped into talent pools? Because I'm thinking usually you would be limited by the availability of certain diverse candidates in the market. And now if you can work out of anywhere and you can hire from anywhere, hopefully that'll provide more flexibility to companies to find that highly sought after talent.
That's very true. I think minorities, especially women, people with disabilities, they really appreciate the ability to work from home and do remote working. From an inclusion standpoint, it's hard to feel connected to the work if you're doing it from home and you've never met your colleagues in person. So inclusion, or like a belonging, that has died off, but not died off, but like it's fallen a little bit. But again, like there are different minority demographics that really appreciate the ability to remote work. I read a tweet the other day that was like, remote work is like a disability issue. It's a women issue. It's people who work in urban areas issue. Just having the access to work and not having to go into offices. That's an important conversation to have.
So in terms of the innovations and in terms of policies and ways to create inclusive workplaces, have you seen any breakthrough changes or anything that it's something that companies could adopt easily and it's a relatively easy change to implement?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why we picked our employer offering to be around employee resource groups is because that's such an easy thing to implement, but it has such a big impact. So like just being in like the Black employee resource group at IBM, it's so nice to see, because like in my day-to-day job, I don't see many, Black people. I'm not working with many Black people, but having this community of Black IBMers who work in the Chicago office, like that's so nice to be around, and that instantly makes you feel more connected at work. So like that's something that's relatively easy to implement. Even if it's a company of 50 people, more than likely you're going to have like a good group of women, or maybe like racial minorities, or whatever it may be. Like that's such an easy step to take towards inclusivity. Even if you're just doing like one-off events or having like a little happy hour virtually, just like bringing those identities together and like building this community within your workplaces can be quite impactful.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think we wanted to do a kind of an open discussion around inclusivity at work, but last call for questions. And then if no other questions, please, get in touch with us. We are on LinkedIn, we are on Instagram. I need to delete this. We no longer have a Twitter, but you can also email me, at team@Chezie.co. Our website is Chezie.co. If you want to go check out some stories or submit your own story, we'd love to have you.
So question, first of all, congratulations with launching such a needed offering in the market. Also, congratulations with the recent fellowship award that you got from NPR. Can you share a little bit more about the whole fellowship and what are your ambitions going forward?
Yeah. So my brother actually participated in like the NPR How I Built This fellowship. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the podcast How I Built This, but they, Guy Raz will interview different CEOs or founders of these like large startups like Airbnb, ClassPass, whatever, and kind of just get their story. So he had this idea of building a fellowship with entrepreneurs where they will bring them together, kind of work on their ideas, work on how to pitch, work on just kind of solidifying your offering. And then at the end, there is a pitch competition where you can win $50,000. My brother, pitched and he won it. He won the 50K, which is awesome. We were really, if you follow us on socials, you'll actually see like this kind of side-by-side image of like when he pitched. He was like, that did not go well. I don't think we won this. And then like a couple weeks later, he texted me like, oh my gosh, we won. So it was a really nice surprise, and we're excited to use the money to like continue building and continue growing. We just brought some developers on board, a designer for our website, so we have big plans with the money, and then hopefully this will just kind of be a propeller to bigger and better things. So
congratulations.
Thank you.
Then last question from me. What's behind the name?
Oh, so we are Nigerian immigrants. We kind of moved to the US when I was 2 and he was 4. And Chezie means reflect in Igbo, which is our native language or tribe. So
reflect. It's a great reminder for everybody. Reflect
Yeah.
before you make a decision, before you bring your talent to an organization, before you share that comment.
Right.
So good.
Yes. Or like even when you're submitting a story, it's all about reflecting on your experiences. So yeah.
Speaking of, did you like the book Americana?
I did. I loved it. Yeah, that's like one of my favorites.
I would recommend it to everyone for summer reading. It's about a Nigerian woman.
Yeah.
And Half of a Yellow Sun, right? Is that the other one?
Yeah, it's the same woman. Yeah.
And how
Yeah. Yes, I haven't read that one. Maybe that one's next.
Oh, it's excellent. Her writing is so good. It's so good.
So let's start a little bit more than deep dive in the inclusion part. And if you have more questions, for sure, you can continue asking Dumebi for her organization and the different great resources and tools that she's offering to the different minority groups she is helping, and also organizations to create more consciousness on that and understanding better. And as she said in her own mother tongue, Chezie, reflecting on those. So let's do a little bit of a reflection based on probably your own experience or your ideas about inclusion. That's a topic that you will set, Dumebi, that is not exactly the same that the diversity, and it's transitioning between those reflections. So, and we will love your perspective on that in the journey you've been going through. It seemed that from the comments you mentioned that the last few years, it's been more energy and focus on that. I'm assuming that is influencing for variables, external environment, and the thing that's been happening, but also probably because of COVID and other things that accelerate with technology, the accessibility to things that in the past were not possible, or the mindset was saying, this is the way we work and everybody needs to come to the office, and that's the transition that is happening. So we would love to hear more about what you think, not only at individual and company level, but also how you feel the journey of diversity and inclusion is going through.
Yeah. So I think it's definitely picked up within the last year, especially with, the Black Lives Matter movement of last summer. And unfortunately, that was a big wake up call for a lot of companies. It was like, oh, wow, I actually have Black people working for me, which is like, you should have known that. You've had Black people working for you for the last 50 years. But, everyone has to start somewhere. And I think, like I said, a lot of companies put out those statements. They put out, we stand against racism or whatever it may be. But now we're seeing a lot of companies actually trying to put that stuff into practice. So whether it be bringing in like diversity and inclusion consultants and really doing a deep dive into like, this is your employee sentiment, these are recommendations that you can implement. We've seen a lot of companies, just reach out from like, again, a recruiting standpoint of like, wow, we would like to get more diverse, employees into the door. So I think it's been a productive, last year in terms of DEI and, creating more equitable and inclusive workplaces, but I do think there's like a long way to go.
Thank you. As another minority woman, I can completely share your thoughts, and even coming later in my life to the US, not just at the beginning of my life. So I've just been here around 8 years. So I think I can resonate not only with your story, but also with the organization. And as Jody said in the chat, that how impressive it's you and your brother continue moving the agenda, not only helping Black communities, but all the minority communities. And probably that's my next question to you in terms of this diversity and inclusion environment. Do you feel that it's a sensation of an integration on that, or do you think that each community feel like it's has different challenges? I feel that sometimes when we try to bucket things to make the movement stronger, it's a possibility, but also not necessarily address minorities in their perspective in a different way, and that's balance between identity basically from one group to another. And I would love to hear more about how you come across in the data with the stories you have, and if it's some insight there.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I think there are kind of two questions there. First, I would say, racism and homophobia kind of have the floor right now. We are, behind on disability inclusion. We're behind on some of the other diverse or minority perspectives. So like, I think it's really unfortunate that like, it's like one person has, we're addressing one issue, and then like in the next couple of years, it'll be like, well, we'll address like the disability, issue or like whatever it may be. So I think, I definitely don't think it's everyone has parity in this race right now, which is a topic for a different day. And then like for, I think something that's unique about us is that we take intersectionality into account. So we don't just, you know, bucket like all women or like all people in the LGBTQ plus, you know, community. I think you have to look at like, yes, I'm a woman, but I'm also Black. I'm also an immigrant. I'm also, you know, have a disability, whatever it may be. So we take an intersectional lens, which is cool. And you can kind of filter the stories for like all of your intersections, all of your identities, not just your one. And we've encouraged companies to kind of look at their programming in the same light, in that like your employees, yes, they might be women, and yes, they might benefit from like your women's programs, but they're also other, you know, identities, and you have to like look at them holistically as opposed to just we're going to group you in this women's category, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important conversation to have as well. And that's something that we do have, especially in our consulting engagements, is that like no one is just one thing. We are built up of so many identities. You have to take each identity into account in order to build, you know, programs that are going to be most beneficial for them.
Yeah, and I think that resonates a lot with our mission, because we also consider that intersectionality, if it is organization focusing 45 plus women, because we feel that they are hugely impacting in the same categories that you mentioned, but also is that intersectionality, because what we see more in our community, it's even before COVID. So if you're a woman out of work for personal reasons and you want to go back and try to find an opportunity, that's a different story. So that's a different set of tools that even you can provide to someone to position it itself again in the work environment, because that gap is not necessarily addressed in the most welcoming way, or it's not easy to explain. On the other hand, women that are today in the workforce, but they feel that it's a glass ceiling, that they are they're Black, they are Latin, they are Asian from demographic, they have the age also, and they have other characteristics that also connect with that transactionality. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Ladies, more questions or thoughts about?
I mean, just a comment. Just congratulations on just this platform and all of your successes. And I think with platforms like yours, with your initiative, like the movement, if you will, becomes more sustainable, you know, like, because you get a little bit cynical with, you know, with things, because things are a hashtag and then they're gone, you know, so having a platform like Chezie gives me hope that this is sustainable, you know, because you're getting in there and diving into the inclusion part of D&I. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's inspiring. I think that the fact that we can see more heroes represented in different shapes and forms, and again, these different perspectives of people winning these awards or other things that create possibilities to create other organizations. And I think that's something that has been happening faster and faster. And I'm assuming that in your line of work, that maybe you see other colleagues and other organizations or other professionals growing in that perspective. So how that's we connected with Amazing Community as well. So if you can think about a couple of personal recommendations for someone who's starting in this journey, for a woman who is in a situation where it's having this idea and want to create more space and still hesitating just in her work as career or starting a new job or whatever is what you will say to them?
Yeah, I would say, like, I think as minorities, especially as women, we often deal with like imposter syndrome and like not thinking we deserve to be in particular spaces, or like especially in corporate America, we don't deserve like a seat at the table. Or if you want to hop into entrepreneurship, like you don't deserve to like have your own thing or build your own things. I would say like don't let imposter syndrome win. Like we are deserving of like, you know, a chance to build something great or to have a great career, and we can be just as successful as like our male counterparts or our younger counterparts or whoever it may be. Like there's nothing, I think we just have to like adjust our mindset and say that anything is attainable for us. So that's something that I say to myself every day. So if you're looking to, you know, switch jobs or go into a new field or start your own thing, like I would say the same thing to you.
I'm curious about what you feel you need as an entrepreneur to get to that next level, though. Have you been working to try to get access to capital, to venture capital? What, in terms of the dream, where do you see going next, and what do you need?
So right now we are bootstrapping. We, this $50,000 from NPR has been great to do some of like the preliminary developing that we need to do. I think we'll be ready to raise capital beginning of next year. So I'll keep y'all posted on how that journey goes. But for now, I think it's just like utilizing this 50K. My brother just took a leave of absence from Accenture, so he, is kind of going on full time first. And then like as we get our first couple customers or get more people onboarded, I'll take a leave. So it'll just be like a progression of things right now. But yeah, I will keep you guys posted on how the the raising journey goes, because I've heard it's difficult.
Excellent.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I think that you've been so generous with your time and your learning experience and the stories. Dumebi, we want to start to wrap up and remind to everybody today that we are a community of women, 45 plus, navigating the present and future of work together in a digital world. And our mission also allows us to connect with amazing women like you and continue building opportunities for minorities, for companies, for individuals in a way that can transform their lives. So we wish you the best success, and we will keep it connected, and we can continue partnering as organizations in any area. I think that's always an opening for both sides. But thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you all for joining. This was awesome.
Great session. Thank you.